Welcome, everyone, to the Be Well with Dr. Michelle Greenwell podcast. And it's my pleasure today to introduce you to Kristen Mangione. Kristen, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Michelle. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Kristen is known as the Dance Alchemist and is a healing artist. And as a choreographer, dancer, and teacher, she's committed to transforming the world through dance. Her movement, meditation, creation, Dance Alchemy for the Soul is a synthesis of over 20 years of dancing professionally, practicing and teaching Eastern philosophy and metaphysical studies, and it's offered in course format, virtually as well as in live events throughout the New York metropolitan area. And her current project is Mapping the Heart. It's about healing and opening the heart's energy field. Through a series of online events and new choreographic works, it's designed to heal and amplify the collective energy of humanity. So here's what some of Kristen's students have said. This one is, what I've been getting is a better sense of self-awareness, and self-expression. I feel more comfortable in my body. I feel more comfortable expressing how I feel. That came from Donna. The other one is, throughout, I have experienced a range of emotions and was reminded to trust my instincts. As a result, the biggest shift I observed was that when I am balanced, I'm more likely to recognize and trust my intuition. That's from Sarah. I am excited to talk with a fellow dancer who loves the healing capacity of dance to inspire our world. And I hope that you're going to enjoy this conversation as well and think a little bit differently about movement and what dance in your kitchen might feel like, or dance in your community. So, Kristen, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So, do you want to tell us what tea you have chosen for today?
I have chosen a red rooibos. I love the earthiness of it. I feel like, as a dancer, I appreciate anything that where I feel more grounded in my body. So I love that it's slightly fruity, but also very grounding at the same time.
Beautiful. And you have put it in a brown mug
Yes.
today.
Yes, this is actually for a wooden mug from Costa Rica, one of my favorite places on the planet. So I specifically chose it because it also makes me feel good.
Okay, and you said a wooden mug.
Yes, it is. It's wooden.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. So really the whole grounding it can just for people to understand that, how we choose what we want to hold in our hands and how we want to connect with the food that we're eating or the drinks that we're consuming, to just be able to, like you said, feel that earthiness and being grounded and holding on to a mug that actually is of a tree. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
Yes.
For those that can't see, there's a butterfly on the front and it looks like a lotus flower at the bottom. So rebirth and rejuvenation.
Yeah. I never even noticed that part at the bottom.
Oh, okay. I was thinking about a conversation, and at the Cape Breton Tea Company, we try to provide teas that help with transformational moments and help people as they're sipping their tea. So I wanted to choose something very similar, actually, because I wanted to do the honeybee.
Mm.
And recently, somebody shared with me that the bees, after they go into the nectar within the flower, it changes the tone of the flower so that other bees get the signal that that flower has already been pollinated. And then they move to the next, which is so incredible when you think about, we just think bees randomly go from flower to flower, but they actually are changing frequency and tones within the flowers, and that's signaling. And if we're lucky enough to engage with those flowers, we have that same opportunity to be hearing that frequency come through. So isn't that, it's so beautiful to think about. And as I've been harvesting rose petals this last week and thanking each rose that I go to be able to pull the petals from it and the bees that have been around it. So with honeybee, there's ingredients in here, which is apple, hibiscus, and rose hip, going with ginger, vanilla, and honeybush. So I wanted to draw attention. So you were talking about the rooibos. Honeybush is very similar to rooibos. And in this one, it's found in South Africa, and it has a very soft flavor, which can make it seem like you've added honey to your tea, but you haven't. But you still get that little taste of that without the sugar.
Mm.
From the spiritual essence of the plant, we find nurturing and self-compassion, as well as reflecting on our creations and sweet memories, which is really interesting. And as I'm thinking about dance and movement and even our careers, right? And you start as a young person, a little person learning how to dance or just dancing in the kitchen and what that dance does as we progress through life. It's wonderful to think about those creations and sweet memories. And second, I wanted to provide a little bit of insight on vanilla. We often just think of it as a flavor. It's soothing and calming, but it also provides the space for personal empowerment.
Mm.
So a lot of times we navigate over to vanilla, maybe in an ice cream, maybe in a pudding. And this is a great way to bring that vanilla in and think again about how we're empowered by movement. So our relationship with the tea blend encourages the richness you and I are going to be talking about. And the affirmation that goes with the tea is, feel the boost to your spirit and the playfulness and joy that transpires. A zest to life is encouraged with each sip. So, Kristen, with what you brought in your mug and your wooden mug, cheers and thank you so much for coming to have this conversation.
Cheers. Thank you.
For those that can't see, my mug today has little bees all over it and a
Mm.
whole bunch of flowers. So, pollinating
Oh,
the flowers.
great.
Yeah. All right. Let's dive in because there's so much richness in movement and dance and the power that it has. So, we're talking about this from the place of the body being a wisdom of gold. What can you share about body wisdom?
Well, I am a big believer, and it's been my experience both with myself and students who have shared the work with that, the body doesn't lie. It is our history. It even on a cellular level, it holds and stores the totality of our experience as human beings. It starts with our DNA, what we carry from our ancestors. And then as we go through life and we amass experiences that are especially encoded biochemically through emotion, we carry it's our history, it's our legacy, and it's also when we connect with the body, it's our access. It's our access to remembering, also to our intuition, even I would say our precognition to things greater than ourselves and what the future sometimes holds. So I really, it is my deep belief that it's the access to all of ourself.
Wow. I'm thinking about, well, you've got in utero, you've got the movements that the baby makes in growth and development and reflex building. And then I think about those little repetitive movements that children use when they're playing. And then as adults, a lot of us disengage from those movement patterns and we just get into our task oriented way of doing things. But that reflection of where we repeat our patterns and then how those patterns either hold us in a place or help us to evolve. I guess that's the two ways that I could say that. And if we kind of reflect back on the freedom of movement that we started with, and then how can we look at the freedom of movement that we have now? And I think a lot of people, as we get older and we get aches and pains, we hear those and that not thinking about what is the freedom of movement we have, we're thinking more of the restriction of movement that we have. And so as you're talking about body wisdom, it's really interesting to think about how could we open that conversation up. You want to comment a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, to your point about this idea, which I believe is, it's not a truth necessarily, but it's how we've been conditioned that as we get older, that our capacities, especially physically, we believe that they have to diminish. And I am a big believer that that is more a function of habit. So in other words, if you introduce and you keep introducing new information, new movement patterns, especially in new movement experiences, as well as overall experiences to a person ongoingly, you can change your body. They've done studies where you can change, your neural patterning, neuroplasticity in the brain. So it does not have to diminish with age. And, that's one of the things that I didn't necessarily expect, but what I've come to discover in working with so many people with Dance Alchemy is that it's introducing that new movement information and stimuli that really opens things. It opens our thinking. It opens our cognitive, like self-reflective awareness. And often a lot of things that are hidden, as you said, those repetitive patterns that are hidden in our subconscious. But the body is the thing that brings it to light. So I really believe that there's an ongoing potential with movement, that science, studies of the brain, neuroscience, as well as, metaphysical studies are really just beginning to scratch the surface and dig deeper into.
Hmm. I'm thinking about my Tai Chi background and training, and everything works, and particularly for a dancer too, when you're coming through with a specific type of training, everything works while the body functions really well.
Mm.
And some of those patterns that we push that aren't really good patterns, but they get the job done, we can get away with. And then we get a little bit older and we can't do that anymore. Then we do have to go to that authentic, positive place of movement that allows us to find our best strength rather than just the strength we happen to hold because we have a strong muscle. And as we get older, it becomes more about how you move freely
Mm.
in the Tai Chi. And it happens the same for dance because we start to let go of what we think it should look like to more how does it feel to move like that? And
Yeah.
how does it make us feel in the end rather than what is the performance looking like to the audience?
Yes.
Um, that little bit of difference. So as people are listening, depending on which walk of life they're in, starting to reflect on maybe where they're holding themselves in a barrier because they have that other pattern or that older thought that came along with them, and then they're degrading themselves or shaming themselves because they can't do something instead of going, it's because I'm supposed to evolve with this. I'm supposed to move myself into a new place. And if I do that, where's the richness? What am I going to find?
Mm.
And there's our gold and the wisdom of the body sitting there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you came from a traditional dance background. Do you want to explore a little bit of where you came from and then how you shifted over to using dance as a healing modality?
Mhm. Absolutely. So I started, I'd say pretty traditionally by most Western dance, educational methods. I started at a local dance studio. I did a combination ballet tap class, and that came about because I was always just naturally moving as a kid. I would dance in front of the television with Cher, and my parents, they had no idea where this sort of innate joy for movement came from. Like that was like my thing. Like I was so expressed and so in my body, and it seems really natural. So after a couple of years, they asked me, they didn't want to pressure me into it, but they said, do you want to take lessons? And I was just all in. And so I started that at 9 and got more serious about it. I happened to live in a place in central New Jersey that had a performing arts program that was integrated into the high school tandem curriculum. So it was modeled after the Fame School in New York that the show and the movie were based on. So I would have my regular academics, and then I would go for a half a day to like a pre-collegiate conservatory training program. So I had technique class, ballet. I was introduced to modern dance for the first time. Really, classical foundational techniques like the Martha Graham technique, Jose Limon, Paul Taylor, who, people I'd never heard of. And then I started to get my education basically in the canon of American modern dance, starting when I was 14. And I was also really fortunate that I was introduced to choreography. Not something I'd ever considered, but it was included dance composition as well as lighting design, stage management, all of these, things, anatomy, nutrition. So by the time I went to Smith College in Western Massachusetts, which is a all women's liberal arts school, but they also have a dance major. And so by the time I got there, I was really well prepared for a pretty serious route into professional dance. I knew that New York was my goal, and I wanted to dance with, a company and tour, and have a big performance part of my life because I just loved performing. And so I stayed on that track. I left my junior year to go to a dance conservatory called the Laban Center in London, which was far expanded my love and understanding of dance because I was introduced to a lot of European work. And then on graduation, I got what I thought was my dream job. I got a short-term contract with a very renowned American choreographer, and did not have the experience I thought I was going to have. Didn't love it. Felt very challenged, really kind of questioning, was this the right place for me? And after that experience, worked a lot still in dance, had my day job. I worked at Juilliard. I worked at American Ballet Theater in supportive capacities, production, administration, while I was really kind of figuring out what was next. I basically felt like I'd had a quarter life crisis. Like, this isn't this is really what I want. And returned to my love of choreographing and started choreographing. But the healing part that I didn't expect, which was the silver lining in all of this at the time, was when I was choreographing, I had a pickup dance company, which means that I would hire dance on a project basis. So I would be making the work, and I would have an audition, hire New York dancers, we'd rehearse, we'd perform, and then that project would end. And then when the next thing came up, we, resume the process. So one of the women who was dancing for me, she was studying this Eastern healing modality called shiatsu, otherwise known as acupressure, which is acupuncture just without the needles. What they do with the needles in acupuncture, we would do with touch, with stretch, with applied pressure with the body. And she needed people to practice on. And one day after a rehearsal, she just said, lie down on the floor. And she started crawling all over my body. And I just sort of went into this like zone where I was not stressed out. I was always usually thinking about what's next, what's next, what's next. And after the little treatment experience that night and the next day, I just felt peaceful. I could think clearly. I just felt like, this is how I've always wanted to feel. And I didn't know it was missing and it was available. So, really, almost immediately I reached out to her and I said, how do I learn how to do this? I knew I was looking for, a better day job solution, something I could do part-time, at my schedule and availability around rehearsals and classes. And then within 6 weeks, I was at this place called the Ohashi Institute, which is the school founded by the man who was to become my mentor, Ohashi, and did 2 years of that program, became a practitioner, did another year of training, became an instructor almost immediately. I don't know, it just felt like the next thing to do. But what was really extraordinary about it was two things. One, his particular practice, Ohashi's method, is based in movement. So there was a natural correlative about expanding my experience of being and moving in my body. So it was just a natural extension of what I understood as a professional dancer. And two, the program was really based in self-development. That Eastern philosophy, Chinese medicine is really based on reflecting and connecting with and interpreting yourself through understanding your energies. your habits, your way of being, your stress levels, and the totality, all of that makes up in how you feel in any given moment. So I didn't know this until I again discovered it, but I was really fascinated at the prospect of deeper understanding of self, of myself, to make sense of who I thought myself to be, why certain things were so important to me, and how to navigate life with more power and more clarity, to feel truly good in myself so that my whole life felt better. And that was the genesis. It all came together.
Wow. When I think about how people, reflect on an incident and then um, maybe hold that, right, as a trauma piece, and not belittling traumas, but just because it would be very traumatic, especially if you'd put in so many years of training. And I don't know that people realize, as junior high and high school students, the depth of knowledge that comes through for dancers in training. That doesn't happen for a lot of people till they're older, and that happens with the emotions around being a junior high person and a high school person, and what you're doing, and then to bring that forward and to have such an incredible opportunity and discovery. I really appreciate what you said about Chinese medicine as a place of reflection, because I think we forget, when we're trying to spot fix everything, that one thing is going to fix. I have a lot of people that ask me about the tea, and they say, "Have you got chamomile?" Because I need it for sleep. And it's like that one herb is going to solve all the problems. No pressure on that little tiny herb. But
Yeah.
when I think about that reflective piece, and then if you start to look at how you're living your life and the qualities you're bringing in and weaving, and if you actually reflect on that, and yes, we have transgressions, but when we have those transgressions, then to be able to say why. And a lot of people don't ask why either. They just have the transgression and then either berate themselves or just continue on, but to actually reflect and bring it forward. So when I think about what you're doing with dance and how you've been able to weave those two together, because I'm sure the Institute didn't have that in mind when you started training there.
Not at all. No, I mean, I will say it's interesting because there was, an acknowledgement that even Ohashi, as a practitioner before he started the school, some of his, really renowned clients were ballet dancers, like with companies like American Ballet Theater, because he in his investigations with the technique and its applications, he found that certain specializations worked particularly well, and he really chose to focus on them. So he focused on like lower back issues with ballet dancers, especially, and some contemporary dancers. And so he had that. And then he also, not surprisingly, he seemed to attract a lot of dancers, either former or currently practicing. Like some of my senior instructors, had a lot of my very first shiatsu teacher was a dancer. I don't think we ever did any projects together, but we talked about that commonality, and we had mutual connections. She actually introduced me to somebody whose company I ended up joining a couple of years in and danced with for like 7 years. So, but to your point, no, they were not expecting that this would be the genesis of something, nor was I. They always felt like, well, these are two kind of distinct things, and then all of a sudden, they weren't.
Yeah. And when you think about too, as a young dancer learning and that career of wanting to be on that stage,
Yes.
and because it's the only thing that we knew about.
Yes.
You don't understand all these other ways that you can be weaving things through. And I'm even thinking about, as you were talking about the different jobs that you took in order to make the ends meet, yet you had all those skills that you developed through your training, and you were able to step into these other roles. But then you were also then to be able to reflect on what you were seeing around you, by being present in the system, but not actually performing within the system.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Some really great
Absolutely.
insights.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping as people are listening and they're starting to think about their own journey and story, where they may not have spent as much time reflecting, and they've got the space with what we're saying today, and just taking some time to take reflective time. We're recording this at the start of the summer. Summer is a great time for thinking of all these wonderful things, reflecting. You get to sit with your feet in the grass or put your feet in the sand, and if you're lucky enough to be near water, and then to take that time and look back, reflect, and think about even what your journey represents and maybe what that means that they could kind of dig into in their own insights.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's move us over to Dance Alchemy for the Soul, because I
Mhm.
think this is going to take our listeners into an even deeper dive into this conversation.
Great. So Dance Alchemy. If so, I fast forward. I After I did my training at the Ohashi Institute for a good, I'd say, almost 10 years. I was primarily focused on. I had a private practice in shiatsu, so I was treating clients, yes, privately, and then also teaching small groups and in the technique. And at the same time, I was still dancing. I mentioned that I think it was also at that time I was dancing with a uh, modern dance company, freelance in New York City. I did that with that one company for about 7 years. I also did with another person for a couple of years. And then periodically, I was still having my own projects. So, how Dance Alchemy came up was there were two really Genesis moments. One was when I was performing with that company that I had been with for 7 years. We were doing a performance in New York City. And at about that time, I was starting to get some bouts of anxiety and stage fright, almost like to a full on, like felt like I was going to have a panic attack um, with going on stage and being on stage. And I'd never had anything like that. I'd always been just a natural performer. Like I felt so at home being in front of people. So as this was bubbling up, I was trying to find ways to, manage it, like deep breathing, a little bit of meditation, but it just wasn't quite doing the trick. And this one particular performance, I remember it was a really intense, like 25-minute piece. And it was in a black box space, which basically you had the seats with the audience, and then you had the performance area, and then there were just some curtains, flats that were the wings where we would go behind when we were on stage. But it wasn't like you could go backstage, right off stage. So I was waiting for my entrance, kind of tucked in the little wing, and I could see the audience sort of out of the corner of my eye. And I was waiting for my cue, watching the dancers, knowing exactly when this person does this movement. Okay, that's my entrance. And then I had this sort of shift where instead of being like in my head and like, oh God, oh God, okay, calm down, it's gonna be fine. It was like part of me just kind of surrendered. And I, instead of like looking for, okay, I gotta go, it was like I just watched. And all of a sudden I saw it was like the dance in front of me was like beautiful. And I didn't feel like my anxiety abated. And then I did my cue, I went on stage, and all of a sudden it was like I was experiencing the dancing
Mm-hmm.
instead of like trying to do it because I'd rehearsed it so much. My body knew what to do, but then I had the freedom to actually be in it as I was doing it. And that was like one of the most miraculous experiences of my life. It was like this epiphany of just pure joy. Not that it was like a particularly happy piece. I mean, it was kind of intense, but there was just so much movement and at some point in the experience, I had this thought. I was like, my God, it would be amazing if people could experience dance the way I'm experiencing it right now. It was just this sort of like floating idea. And I think a couple weeks later, I was talking to someone about this experience, and I said, I kind of want to just try out some ideas about, because all the Ohashi work about sensing the body. It's like I want to try out some ideas of what if I explore this further. And so she said, "Oh, that sounds amazing." And so she gathered a bunch of her friends, and we got together in a studio in Brooklyn, and it was like magic. I just took a lot of the principles of what I was teaching in shiatsu and more of the movement, all I knew from dance and the body awareness and movement exercises, and I sort of synthesized things and put in some theory, and it was completely transformative. And I kept exploring that for a while, and then kind of hit pause because a lot of things shifted with my business and my studio. And then in 2019, for whatever reason, I was in Costa Rica, where the mother's from, and I was improvising, and it was like the seed of that idea came back to me because I'd been thinking about working with the heart. And then I thought, why don't I go back to what I was doing in those workshops, but I have to do something about the heart. And so again, I had a bunch of students, and I invited them to my studio now in Hoboken, where I live. And I did this heart workshop with them, and I had no idea. And these students, some of them I'd known for several years, they were crying and they were laughing and they were talking about things I never knew about them. They were releasing grief and trauma. They were healing things that they hadn't even realized they were carrying. And it was like it was fully manifested. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Is for me is when you have those kind of days and you see that all unfold in front of you. Just there's just so much richness in it. It's like I just want to do this every day.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting because people will think about that it could be so difficult to unwind some of those traumatic pieces and stories that have been held on for a long time. And then for those of us who work with this all the time, it's just part of life. It's just that process of discovering that little piece that doesn't need to be there anymore or shouldn't have been there in the first place. And when it lets go, watching people's faces light up, and in your case, you get to see whole bodies light up, and this free movement happen that they may never have experienced before. Um, they've always assumed that you walk this particular way because that's the only way they knew how to walk. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, you could skip. And it
Yeah.
could feel good while you're skipping. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's again coming back to what we were talking about before with the potential of the body, that when you change, the physical structural patterns, it's really incredible how it changes the emotions, the thoughts, the state of being, and how quickly people can shift. And to see them be surprised at their own capacities that they didn't know that they have. That's one of my favorite parts of it, is
Mhm.
that I just get to sit, and I always give people an opportunity for a reflection piece if they want to, share about it. And that's that part, that's such gold, to see what they uncover in themselves for themselves.
Mhm.
They get to keep that forever, and it's
Mhm. Mhm.
magical.
Yeah. The other piece that is always astounding too is there's parts that we're holding on so tight and then they release, you move to the new place and you actually forget the old part. So that reflective time is really important because that is going to be erased and disappear, which is great because then people don't have to try to hold on to the stuff that just doesn't really matter. Um,
So,
yeah. Okay. So I'm thinking about, people do lots of different kinds of movement.
Mhm.
Why is dance such a great catalyst for this kind of work over somebody just going to play tennis or get out on the hockey rink or something like that?
Well, I think there's two things to it. One is that when you have, a very kind of what I call a codified practice, so like, a sport, for example, or even certain forms of dance, like more technique-based dance. And I've found this with trained dancers sometimes. If you're very practiced in the form, just like I was before I had that moment in that performance, it can be really tough to get past those conditionings. So, like, it doesn't give you necessarily a lot of space for discovery, right? Because you're focused on other outcomes and you're also focused on doing things a particular way. You've often been trained, like, this is the intention in dance, traditional dance, like, technique. This is the way that it's done very often. Classical ballet is very much about that at its core, right? And then there's room for interpretation. Um, but I would say, especially the type of dance work that I do, because I always tell people this is not a technique class. In fact, I'm going to ask you to work most of the time with your eyes closed because I don't want you to be focused on what it looks like. I want you to focus on what it feels like. And then it also, I give them room in how I lead. You're going to interpret what you hear. So I'm not going to tell you how I want you to move your wrist and your hand. I want you to focus on the image of whatever. And then based on that, I want you to find your own way of doing it. It's like, here's an analogy. If you were in a painting or drawing class and you were asked to draw or paint realistic rendition of a sunflower, that's a very specific task, right? And you might be training as a visual artist in your training to do that. But you might also have another context where they say, I want you to interpret the depth and breadth and the feeling of the world of that sunflower. And I don't want you to even look at it necessarily. I want you to capture and evoke through your expression what you say it is. That's a completely different expression. So dance alchemy is about the latter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking back to tea and herbs and
Mm-hmm.
that same idea where they try to pigeonhole that herb is good for because I think I need to fix that part in me. And instead of the overall, how do I want to feel out of all this? I want to feel rested. I want to have mental clarity and I want to have the energy to do what I want to do. And that doesn't come from one herb providing you with a good night's rest. It's one approach, but it might not be the right approach. And so that self discovery of the closing the eyes and not caring what it looks like. I've been in those classes and the transformation is amazing. Um, and then in time stops. That's the other really cool thing because when you get to experience how time can actually become non-existent and you're just there being. It's so few of us have that because we're always on a clock. The only
Mm-hmm.
time we might not be is when we say, I'm going to sleep in this morning and I'm just going to be lazy this morning. But being lazy isn't quite the same as experiencing inside what can be created with no boundaries. Yeah, such rich.
Beautifully, beautifully said. Yeah, there's something I really hear in that about because you do connect with, I'll say it this way, the infinite, infinite time, infinite space, especially, the darkness behind the closed eyes, that it shifts the brain waves. And so I would assert my senses, it really shifts you much more into the right brain functioning, which is big picture, no time, as opposed to left brain, which is so much like reductive, like you said, this little thing, and higher cerebral cortex functioning about like reason, problem solving, really great for when it's appropriate. But then there's this whole other realm that we get very disengaged with, which you're talking about children. That's what's really active up until we're about 8 years old. So the ability to tap back into the imaginative capacities for a person and to sense and to feel the way that if you watch kids, that's what they do. That's their whole reality. And it's Awesome.
And it's fun.
Yes.
Exactly. Because where do we all go on vacation? We all go back to that time. We all try to capture that time.
Mhm.
And it might
Exactly.
be as simple as you sit in the sand and you think you're lying on your beach towel, but you're actually going back to when you were able to play in the sand, shovel and pail, and your hands will play with the sand. Um, but
Mm.
you're taking that journey back. But it's lovely if you can take that journey back and dive deeper and
Yeah.
find more richness
Mm.
than just those few moments of sitting on the beach, not really in reflection, just enjoying, which is also lovely. Um, but to make those transitions and those changes really happen
Mm.
and permanent. That's the other piece, because a lot of people choose things that are temporary, and then if you want to really make change, be able to really transition it so you do let go of that old stuff, and then you stand in wonderment with the new stuff.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Hmm. Okay. This might be a good place to put in a little bit of experience. I know you have an exercise that you want to share with everyone. If you're driving in your car listening to this podcast, you may have to wait and repeat the exercise once you finish driving. But I invite people to take the time now to really feel what we've been discussing. So take it away, Kristen.
Thank you. So, this is a little taste of Dance Alchemy for the Soul. And this particular exercise I call Between Heaven and Earth. And you can do this exercise either sitting or standing. I don't recommend as much lying down, although you can imagine it if you are lying down, that's fine. But sitting or standing both work really well. So to start with, whether you're sitting or standing, just go ahead and make yourself comfortable if you need to kind of adjust in your seat or how you're standing. And if it's comfortable to you, I'm going to recommend close your eyes, or you could also just take a soft gaze down towards your floor. And then just take a nice breath in and exhale. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to make two fists. And I want you to just gently tap the top of your head. So you're just releasing any tension, very gentle tapping wherever it feels comfortable. And then you can start to make your way along the back of your head, maybe down the back of your neck a little. Just letting go any tension. And then the tops of your shoulders. And then if you want to shift your hands, you can go to your middle back, upper middle back, wherever you can reach, tapping out muscle tension anywhere you're holding, down towards your lower back. And then come around to your ribs, gentle tapping with loose fists up to your chest. Check in with your breathing as you're tapping. Good. And then just go ahead and release the hands. Just let them fall either long by your sides or you can rest them in your lap. And just notice any sensations of tingling. Notice your breath. And now turn your attention, your mind's eye, your imagination, to the connection between yourself and your floor. So if you're sitting, that might be the soles of your feet against your floor and or the bottom of your pelvis, how you are sitting in a chair or a cushion, however you're seated, as well as your tailbone at the very base of your spine. Or if you're standing, you can notice the soles of your feet against the floor or the earth. And then I'm going to invite you to just shift your weight a little side to side. So whether you're sitting or standing, you're just shifting your weight a little more to the right foot and then the left foot. And as you do this, see if you can start to feel a little heavier and more grounded. You can even imagine as if you were a big, tall oak tree and you have these huge roots down, way down deep into the earth, keeping you nice and solid. Just feeling that solid foundation in your lower body. And now keeping that foundation, go ahead and just start to circle your abdominals, your hips, whether you're sitting or standing. Just making a little circle. Allow the belly to be soft. If you're standing, your knees can be a little soft. And just feel how that area around your navel is kind of circling, opening up, expanding even maybe a little bit. And see if you can just let the circling be pleasurable. Just find a little freedom, a little fluidity. Let it be easy. And now let the circling travel a little higher as if it's moving up your spine to the area of your heart. So you're allowing that heart space, your chest to open. Maybe the space between your shoulder blades, your upper back. Almost as if your heart could just shine a light far out in front of you. And now we're going to let that travel a little higher. So up through your neck, your head. Let your whole torso, head, neck, shoulders, upper body, just go with the circling. And then finally, allow the crown of your head to feel lighter, as if your head were a balloon, just floating up into a huge, boundless sky. See if you can just let the head float. Maybe let the circling get a little smaller. Until the circling just naturally starts to fall away. Your head floating towards the boundless sky. Your feet, pelvis, connected deep down into the depths of the earth. Allow your hands to just shift and rest somewhere around your navel area. And now just breathe into the space under your hands. sensing the polarity between the two. Suspended between heaven and earth. Take one more deep breath in. As you exhale, slowly release your hands. And then you can reopen your eyes. Start to come back. Notice how you feel.
It was lovely to feel the freeness of the circle and then the stillness. For me today, the stillness was really a predominant piece, which was interesting. And I appreciated when you said suspended between heaven and earth. And we don't often think about that. You know, I'm thinking in Tai Chi, we have the white stork spreads wings, which is connecting heaven and earth.
Mm.
So you become the conduit.
Mm.
But in this case, suspended, the lightness of being of that, it had such a richness in the way that you said it.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Mm.
I also believe, the body, I like the word you said, conduit. The body is our conduit. I say, it's the container holding the spirit in the earthly plane.
Mm-hmm.
What I feel this particular type of movement and other practices of movement, Tai Chi, can really tap into exploring that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So as people are trying to bring themselves back into the conversation, as my own head's trying to do that, can you explore for people if they were to start to participate in an activity of dance of this way, what could they expect as they're coming through in a class or workshop, or how would they take that journey?
Well, um, I offer Dance Alchemy for the Soul. I've done it in many different formats. I had done all in person up until the pandemic, and then by necessity pivoted to doing things virtually online, as well as self-paced courses of study, recordings and accompanying educational materials. But what I find with people, however they're participating, is that I always design things with a particular topic of exploration. So for example, just this little sample of, we're exploring the phenomenon, the polarity of spirit and body, heaven and earth. And so I feel like by giving people an entryway, something to focus on as an aim, that is an access point. It's a place to look, right? When we say the body or consciousness, that's a very vast topic. So the first thing is just having a very particular point of exploration. We're going to explore personal power through the solar plexus chakra. Just an example, something I've done in the past. Or, a lot of my current work is about opening the heart space. So one of the things is exploring things like you mentioned trauma, healing trauma, releasing grief, often that people are not aware that they're still holding, that's having an impact. De-armoring the heart. Often as we go through life, one of the ways in which we learn to emotionally protect ourselves out of the necessity, what we equate with necessity of experiencing heartbreaks of any degree. Doesn't have to just be in relationships, can be with things like job situations or parts of life or that kind of thing. But those entry points are a way for people to explore a particular area And then in that processing reflection piece, like you said, often get clarity about, like, let's say the heart. I didn't realize I was still holding all this stuff about my father's death. I'm talking about a student I had who was in that first heart workshop. And I can be sad about it, but I can also hold the love at the same time, because I reconnected with this memory of when we used to collect seashells on the beach. I'm quoting this person, what she shared, and it just so, so moving. And then with that, as you said, when there is that bringing it to conscious awareness, there's a new space that opens. So what will happen is, in the process of bringing something to conscious awareness, there's then the opportunity for a new space and new choices. So people will begin to think differently, feel differently, and perhaps most importantly, act differently. I had someone in one of those workshops about personal power and the solar plexus chakra that not long after that, she realized, I'm really not valued enough in my job. I'm going to start looking for other jobs. And so she submitted resumes to other competitor companies. And when her boss found out, he offered her a promotion and a $20,000 raise. So yeah. And I didn't, we never talked about that in the workshop. She came up with that herself, which when she came back and told me, I almost fell out of my chair. So my point is, one never knows, but that's what's so amazing about it, is that it's the individual, it's your own willingness to look and see what's there and to connect the dots that then you get to say. And you could start to make all kinds of different choices. And then all of a sudden your life can look in totally different ways, like the best possible ways that you did not expect. And that's for me, that's what transformation is. We're not limited by our past.
Exactly. And we're also, only going forward. It's like having blinders on because you only know what you know. And so you can only go forward in that capacity unless you start to widen the vision and open yourself up to try new experiences and see where that goes. And then not thinking about it's a linear path, birth to death. It's
absolutely,
it's this meandering piece that just, all the richness, all the stories you build up as you go along. Yeah. Wow. Okay. How can people find you?
Well, they can find me primarily, well, definitely through my website, which is my name, KristenMangioneDance.com. That has all the information about Dance Alchemy for the Soul. They can also find me on Instagram. I'm the Dance Alchemist on Instagram. And we also have a Facebook page, Dance Alchemy for the Soul. So any of those are great ways to find out about, current offerings. I do now monthly virtual Dance Alchemy for the Soul special events. I have one coming up this coming month. I also have in-person monthly gatherings as well. And then there are also, as I said, self-paced courses available through my website. So they can find any and all of that stuff.
Beautiful. And the interesting thing, I'll just mention for people if they're thinking about things, because a lot of people say to me, oh, if it's a recording, I just don't get the same out of it as being in person, which, it's lovely to connect with people. But what's also interesting is you connect with all the people who've connected already on that course. So you start to bring in the richness of the energy of those people. Absolutely. And I don't think people think about that capacity. You could be in a class and you can have 10 people in the class and you have the experience, it's finished, nobody recorded it. But then you have this opportunity of something's recorded and you've already set the parameters around it. But then you have the richness of all the people who've come to take that class and what they discovered, because now you become part of that same matrix.
Yes.
And it really is an interesting way to think of learning rather than just, I signed up for this class and I could do the modules on my own time. Which you can do, but
yes, no, that's so beautifully said, Michelle, because I hear something in that, because I'm thinking about the nature of how people are interacting with the material, that, they're bringing their energies, and that really does inform something. So it's layers and layers and layers. And I'm thinking about any of the stuff that I've created that's been captured, and to think about it that way is quite profound. That's really beautiful. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I so easily transitioned when during the pandemic when we had to, well, I say that now. It probably wasn't as easy as I think in my head now, transitioning over to teaching online. But what I found really powerful was sometimes when you're in the room and you've got that connection between the two biofields of the two people involved, there's this connection, and it's like our two beings are trying to understand each other energetically. And sometimes that slows the process down just because of the way we're interacting, which can be wonderful. But online, I find that then there's this speed that kind of comes in because you don't have that same physical right in the presence, but you have this energetic connection. And it just transfers a little bit. So when some people say to me, it's harder to learn it that way. And I say I never discovered that because I just embraced that I got to interact with so many more people and have different experiences than I could find in my local community. And
Yes.
uh, and that was a really big richness for me during the pandemic. But it continues to seem to unfold for me, even though yes, I can go into my community and do lots of things, but I still have this lovely community and opportunity to interact with such incredible people like yourself. So,
Yeah. Awesome.
uh, Kristen, thank you for sharing so much about what you've been doing and how it's transforming. I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the opportunity you're providing people. So,
Thank you
thank
for having
you.
me. Thank you.
So with that, let's have a toast. And usually I would give an activity of movement afterwards, but you put my foot sensors into a dance-oriented capacity, and I think everybody's good. So cheers and thank you, Kristen.
Cheers. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For those listening online, if you haven't explored anything like this before, I invite you to think about how perhaps your journey of discovery could be a little bit different. And please check out what Kristen has been doing and the kinds of programs she offers. And I hope it provides you with some great insights of some new things that you could be adding to your life. So, with that, we'll close this podcast. Be well, everyone.